Hi, it's John Ebrington here. Welcome to my video. So today's case I want to discuss from the 1990s. Involves a bomb hoax and two nuisance calls, improper use of the telephone. And the offence occurred, you know those funny days between Christmas and the New Year when you're not quite sure what day of the week it is and everywhere's very quiet, everybody's with their families normally. Christmas has got over and we're kind of relaxing after Christmas and we're getting ready for the new year. So it happened in those days in between the two. Now the offender is aged 18 years old. He was very quickly produced in court, magistrates court, and they decided that the offence, the bomb hoax and the two nuisance calls were so serious that they didn't have sufficient sentencing powers at the magistrates to deal with the case, so they put it up to Crown Court. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? So the case was about 3 o'clock in the morning. I should call him Brian, it's not his real name, but Brian made 3 calls to the emergency services. One of them, he said there was a burglary in progress, that he could actually see burglars climbing into this house around the back. He gave false details to the police. He gave the name of one of his friends, the name and address of one of his friends. And he, on a second call, said that a shed was on fire. And then finally, he said that a bomb had been planted somewhere and that the bomb squad needed to come immediately. So the police called round at his friend's address, the false name and address that he'd given, that of his friends, and the mum confirmed. She said, "Oh no, that's not my son's mobile phone." And after the police had gone, she phoned up the number, and lo and behold, it belonged to Brian. She recognised Brian's voice. So she pretty much did the job for the police, didn't she? She phoned the police and said, "Look, I phoned that number and I can tell you it belongs to Brian and this is where he lives." And Brian was an 18-year-old and he was living in this hostel for the homeless, and he was 18. So he was very quickly produced at court, and he was sent up to Crown Court, and he was during Crown Court in early February. And in the interim, I'd been allocated this case and I had to prepare a report for the Crown Court. So probation are basically in between the prosecution and the defence. We're independent and we have to make an assessment of the offence, the seriousness. We have to give background information about the person, and then we have to make a recommendation to the court. So first of all, the worrying thing was, for me, was normally the Crown Prosecution Service and the police send a full pack about the person to probation, but basically I only got one sheet of paper where there was a brief paragraph about the offence. And what we really need is a background check about the person, and whether or not the person's got previous convictions or not. We need to know whether he's had cautions or, that kind of thing. We need to have copies of the interview, and what he said in interview is very helpful and important to us. And any witness statements, all those sort of things. But basically, I just got a paragraph. That's pretty poor, really, considering that this was a Crown Court matter. Not uncommon either at that time, but poor. So for probation to do a good job, we need as much information from other agencies as possible. And just get a paragraph is poor. So probation really, a lot goes on in the interview, and a lot of skills are required to interview somebody to get the maximum out of the person and to get them to speak honestly and openly with you. Quite a lot of skills involved. Now, the problem was with Brian was he came for his interview at the wrong time. He was quite chaotic. He presented as very immature 18-year-old, very unsophisticated, unable to articulate. He seemed quite depressed, and he said that he'd been using alcohol to try and cheer himself up, and that's worrying. And he said basically he was drunk at the time of the offence, wandering around drunk at 3 a.m. and been drinking on his own. All a bit worrying, and if people are drinking because they're depressed, could be worrying, because that could lead to an alcohol problem or even an alcohol addiction. So I kind of spoke to him about his memories of growing up. He said his very first memories were of his parents arguing. He had a very unsettled existence. He kept moving address quite a lot as he was growing up. His dad worked abroad, moved around. His parents arguing all the time. He had a lot of trouble at school throughout his schooling. I get the impression that he was struggling, that he may have some sort of disability, but I hadn't been advised of that and had no information about it, and I tried to find out. There were a lot of difficulties, and he told me that he'd been suspended from his schools on at least 10 occasions, which is quite honest of him, really. He didn't try and hide anything from me, and he told me he'd been suspended at least 10 occasions, and it was for things like being disrupted in class. Quite a lot of retaliation going on as well. I think people were trying to bully him and he was fighting back and things like that. Now, age 10, he told me that his parents split. His two sisters went to live with mum, and him being the lone boy, he went to live with dad, although dad was moving around lots, so on occasion he had to stay with his grandmother. So all these problems continued at school, and when he was about 14, he was sent to a special unit, and he got on quite well there. Now, what I did do was I got his grandmother's phone number from him, and I phoned up his grandmother and got a lot of information about how he'd done at school and all that kind of thing, confirmation from his grandmother. But as far as I know, I don't think he'd been stated as having any particular disability, or maybe should have been, and I that kind of worries me. Now, I found out, I think it may have been from grandmother, that he'd been given a caution for arson. Now, that really worried me, because I had no details. The police hadn't told me. The Crown Prosecution Service hadn't told me. But he had a caution he'd received not long ago, at some point, received a caution for arson. Now, arson is very serious indeed. A bit surprised that you're given a caution for arson. And, normally arson's serious, and it's an indicator that the person, might have mental health issues, or psychologically disturbed, or very worrying. And I just felt that it was so poor that nobody told me as well about this caution. And it's kind of really, and I didn't know anything about it, So what happened in Brian's story was he kind of left school, and Brian's dad pulled strings with the builders he worked for, Brian's dad, and Brian got a job with his dad's firm. They didn't actually work together, in that Brian's dad worked on a different building site, but Brian had to make his own way and get to work, and he did quite well. And bless him, he saved up from his wages and got himself a moped to get to and from work. But very sadly, on his way home from work one day, he was struck by a lorry and very seriously injured. Both legs were broken, and severely broken, and he was in hospital with his legs in plaster and that for months. And then, it was 4 weeks. He was 1 month in hospital. And then he went to stay a couple of weeks with his grandmother, and then he was taken back by his dad to the homeless hostel. Now that hostel is run by a charity, and it is for the street homeless, basically. It's got one great big dormitory. And one of the rules at the hostel is that you must vacate the premises during the daytime. And poor Brian was pretty fed up and annoyed. He said, well, look, you know, I've just come out of hospital. I need time to recuperate. Can I stay in the hostel? And they said, oh, no. You got to go out. You know, you got to go. So he's wandering around the streets. He wasn't fit to go back to work yet. And at a loose end round the streets. Pretty sad. Anyway, Christmas comes up, and Brian gets an invite to his mum's house for lunch. And after lunch, he went round and had an evening at his dad's. And the reason why, I forgot to mention, why he'd been placed in the hostel by his family was that Brian didn't get on with his dad's new partner, and she had a baby. And Brian feels that his dad's priorities were more towards the new baby, and that aged 18, dad placed him in this hostel. So for the homeless, and the hope was, and you know, grandmother explained to me that they were frustrated, but they felt that the local authority should house him. But of course, there's no guarantee of housing with a local authority, and there's huge shortages of housing these days. And he had to stay at this pretty grim and Spartan hostel. So on Boxing Day, they said, well, look, Brian, sorry, you're not allowed to stay in the hostel. And he was wandering around the town, probably feeling pretty excluded from his family and pretty depressed. And, you know, the offence occurred a few days later. So a lot of people think, oh, criminals, we're soft on crime in this country. But my whole point of telling these stories is to say, well, look, this is sort of case comes before court. You know, you're saying send more people to jail and longer prison sentences. But how do you think Brian would have coped in jail? Not good. I think he probably would have come out even worse, don't you? So my main worry, I actually asked the judge, was to consider ordering a psychiatric or psychological assessment by, you know, report to find out more about the arson and to find out more about what Brian was going on. And I also indicated that I felt that Brian was very immature and really, ideally, he needed to be living in a family situation. But that said, I kind of said that probation would be a possibility, that I was happy to have him on probation. But one factor would be that we would be trying to negotiate with the family to see, you know, could he live on a more permanent basis with mum, perhaps, or with a bit more support from mum or around the grandmothers or whatever. I also suggested that part of the probation order would be for him to have alcohol counselling and education about the risks of making sure that he kept control of his alcohol, because it was a factor in his offence. And we had in our office a housing champion. Now, you know, and I really want to say to the family that, and to the public, the probation do not have access to housing. We have some hostels, but these are for very, very serious offenders. And putting Brian in such a hostel with serious offenders is dangerous and, you know, would cause more problems. Not at all good for Brian. So, but we did have a housing champion, I'll call the person, and that person was a specialist and had contacts with the local authority housing people and also other supportive hostel accommodation, because he really needed to move on from this really bad homeless hostel. And finally, this was my idea, bespoke option, and I was prepared to do it, but very unusual, and I call it bespoke, was that I wanted Brian to meet the people from the emergency services, the people that take the calls, people from the fire brigade and from the police, and for them to explain to him what a nuisance he caused, what it's like to get these nuisance causes and what problems it causes them, and to put their perspective, the victim's perspective, quite plainly to him so that he learns from the situation. And I thought that would be very, very useful indeed. And so that's it, really. So don't you agree? Probation was better and more useful. And I think really, you know, this arson really needed to be looked at, and he needed some sort of psychological assessment, really, I think, and possibly therapy, you know, because arson is, surprised he got a caution for it. And then it's funny, isn't it? And then, you know, a first-time offender immediately gets banged up to Crown Court. You know, our scales of justice. So I hope that puts over a bit of the what it's like to work at probation. Do look out for my book. So it's called You the Sentencer. It's available on Amazon UK, and it's brilliant. Check it out. It's very interactive, and you get to do things and decide things. Okay? Anyway, all the very best now. Cheers now. Bye-bye.